Okay. All right. Welcome to the College of Complexes. My name's Don, and I'm going to be the moderator this evening. Tonight's program is titled "Democracy for the USA." Anti-election, don't vote campaign. Our speaker is going to be Ted Aranda. He's going to be, as the 2014 congressional election approaches, Democracy for the USA will be running an anti-election, don't vote campaign. They will urge Americans not to play the plutocrats' dead-end game. In this College of Complexes presentation, Ted Aranda will explain the logic behind a don't vote campaign, as well as the DUSA's radical program for actual democracy in the United States. Now, let's have a warm round of applause for our speaker this evening, Ted Aranda.
Thank you. Testing. Okay.
Oh, it should be working.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you, and nice seeing everybody again. I presented a few months ago, actually. In this last College of Complexes presentation, that was in, I think, January 25th, I described my experience with Occupy Chicago, and I touched very briefly on the ideologies of anarchism and socialism, which were prevalent among occupiers. I asserted that these ideologies were a major cause of Occupy's failure. I also described the new organization that some of us former occupiers started, Democracy for the USA. Today I'd like to expand on my critique of anarchism and socialism, and then go on to explain Democracy for the USA's anti-election campaign. I want to emphasize that my criticisms of anarchism and socialism, they'll be quite extensive as you'll see, are not personal. I have a lot of friends and acquaintances who call themselves anarchists and socialists, and of course I respect them nonetheless. My problem is with the broad ideologies, not with individuals. I think it's critical that we confront these ideologies intellectually, since they dominate the left and, in my opinion, are holding it back. Okay. A long time ago, an anarchist friend of mine gave me a book on anarchism by David Graeber. And it had the title Anthropology in it, like an anarchist anthropology. That was quite a few years ago. I so much disagreed with Graeber's arguments that I wrote a little review of the book to my friend. In that review, I noted Graeber's utter lack of realism and his extreme naivete. Just recently, I was given another book by Graeber to read by another friend, this one entitled The Democracy Project, A History, a Crisis, a Movement. And this was published just last year, so it's very recent. And of course it has to be recent because it's about the Occupy movement, which just happened a couple years ago. Okay, so the title refers to Occupy Wall Street, which Graeber considers to have been a democratic movement par excellence. Graeber was actually a primary founder and leader of Occupy Wall Street. By the way, I'm just curious, did anybody know that? I didn't even know that before I ran into this book. Did you all know that David Graeber, who's kind of a famous guy, was actually, right in the middle of Occupy Wall Street and was a founder of it? Did anybody know that? Okay, all right, just curious. So this book of Graeber's is both a personal history and a more abstract discourse on democracy. It's actually quite interesting and a pretty good read. But I still have the same basic criticisms of Graeber's anarchist philosophy as I did before. In fact, the book helped me see more clearly than ever where Occupy went wrong, why it failed. I have two major problems with anarchist political thinking as reflected in Graeber's book. One is the way they see the left movement. One is the way they see the left movement in relation to the existing political system, and the other is their notion of what a democracy is. Graeber explains that when the Occupy movement rose up, occupiers rejected the existing political order entirely and instead worked to create quote-unquote free spaces outside of the state. These spaces would be a counterpoise to the existing order, where
Okay.
a lot of distractions here.
Yeah, listen. I'd like to, if I may, I'd like to ask that you all turn off or silence your cell phones, please. So either turn your cell phone off entirely or set it on vibrate, please. That way, we can continue without interruption, and everybody in the audience can hear what Ted has to say. Now, I'm aware that a lot of you may strongly disagree with Ted, but if you do, that's all the more reason to listen to him. So, okay, Charlie, you're violating the one fool at a time rule. Now, if you do disagree with Ted, that's all the more reason to listen to him now, so that you can give a better rebuttal speech later.
Okay, so as I was saying, occupiers rejected the existing political order and wanted to create free spaces outside of the state. And these spaces would be a counterpoise to the existing order, where forms of direct democracy could operate within self-governing communities. So from the beginning, occupiers weren't so much interested in transforming the current political system as escaping from it. Literally, they were basically separatists. This explains the whole encampment thing. Graeber notes that historically, anarchist rejection of existing society has been more likely to take the form of flight, infection, and the creation of new communities than of revolutionary confrontation with powers that be. He explains that Occupy pursued a dual power strategy. We are trying to create liberated territories outside of the existing political, legal, and economic order. Since anarchists are opposed to the state as such, they're not interested in creating an alternative governmental edifice. Furthermore, they consider a democratic state to be a contradiction in terms. So they're fundamentally small-minded. Generally speaking, occupiers were not really committed to confronting, bringing down, and replacing the representative state. Instead, they were satisfied to hide from it in little pockets, whether in encampments or after these were broken up in small groups working on relatively small projects in individual neighborhoods. Excuse me, I'm pretty thirsty, I don't know why. And by the way, I should say, although I made this point in my last presentation, many of you weren't there, I was very deeply involved in Occupy Chicago for many months, for quite a long time actually. The second problem with anarchist philosophy is that it has an unreal conception of democracy. Graeber says that democracy is not straightforward majority rule. It's not a system of government at all, but rather a set of social and cultural attitudes, a quote-unquote democratic sensibility. Quoting Graeber, it's just the belief that humans are fundamentally equal and ought to be allowed to manage their collective affairs in an egalitarian fashion, using whatever means appear most conducive. And to Graeber, the most conducive means is the consensus process, not voting. He favors consensus over voting because he wants to avoid divisions into winners and losers, which voting obviously creates. Most importantly, no one should be physically coerced to go along with a decision they disagree with. Instead, proposals are to be continually refashioned in a spirit of compromise, creativity, and reasonableness until they reach a form amenable to everyone. This explains why some members of Occupy Chicago were opposed to voting on proposals, which I thought was very strange. To my logical mind, you present a proposal, you discuss it as long as you want, and amend it if necessary, and then the group decides on it by voting for or against. End of story. But some occupiers saw things differently. They disliked voting, apparently because it was an open acknowledgement of disagreement, which they abhorred. Anarchism means without rulers. Anarchists want to be free of any forms of power or domination, including majority rule. They reject the physical enforcement of decisions, rules, and laws by the threat of prisons or police. So, what would be the political structure of the free society of anarchist dreams? Graeber repeatedly states that he doesn't know. He says he's, quote, not interested in working out the detailed architecture of what a free society would be like. Like other anarchists, he rejects detailed models that propose systems of power, since he feels that there should be no such thing as systems of power. This probably explains why he rejects Athens as a model of democracy, and instead professes to see examples of democracy among the American Indians and among pirates, on the early American frontier, and in village councils in Africa, India, Bali, and Bolivia. In fact, in all times and places, he says. Athens had clear-cut institutions of government, which you can study, as so many historians have done, and which you can more or less replicate with the necessary modifications. But Graeber prefers variety and improvisation to settle institutions. And he uses that word many times, improvisation. He likes that. There's an inherent and deliberate vagueness and extemporaneousness about anarchism. And this no doubt explains why Chicago occupiers were so uninterested in the precise models of government that I would constantly describe to them. They didn't want to hear about concrete systems. In general, occupiers were not really committed to meaningful democracy. That is to say, to majority rule through community assemblies. This explains why they were so quick to abandon their own General Assembly, a quintessentially democratic gathering, which many of them found to be more of an annoyance than an inspiring model of democracy. And I don't know if many of you know about this, but the attendance at the General Assembly plummeted like stone. And for a long time, I and literally a handful or maybe 10, 15 people were trying to carry it on, but it was a dead letter for a long time. So there you have it, and I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time reviewing all of this. To me, anarchist strategies are patently misguided, if not downright foolish. Their aversion to governmental authority is childish. Who's going to operate public transportation? Who's going to ensure food safety? Society needs a good deal of administrative order and regulation. People can't do any darn thing they please. That's the reality of life. Anarchism is ultimately individualistic, whereas a viable society is ultimately collectivist, with government being the agent and the guardian of the collective will. Government is there first and foremost to protect society from antisocial individuals. There has always been and there will always be government. Why? Because although most people are in fact reasonable, there have always been and there will always be idiots, murderers, thieves, rogues, and all kinds of antisocial people, not least among the rich. People who will want to flout societal norms and thereby disturb, hurt, or take advantage of their fellow citizens. You have to be able to lay down the law and say, no, you can't do that. Or you're going to do what we all decided to do. And you have to be able to back this up with force. Not only is it futile to try to get away from the state, which is all-encompassing and almost omnipotent, but you need a state. It's just a matter of what kind of state. Another concept among occupiers is consensus, this thing about consensus. Well, consensus doesn't work even among like-minded people in relatively small groups, much less in society with its huge numbers and disparate populations. There have always been and there will always be irreconcilable differences among people. Yet societal decisions have to be made, and obstinate people have to be compelled to respect the collective will.
You good?
Without laws enforced by police and courts,
Dessert?
excuse me, I'm going to take. Without laws enforced by police and courts, there will be people flying through red lights, people stealing and robbing all over the place, corporations dumping even more pollutants into the environment, all kinds of fraud everywhere you turn, people clear-cutting every forest and killing every whale and every elephant until they're all gone, etc., etc., etc. People barely obey the laws even now with a coercive state in place. How can anybody with any common sense expect that people will suddenly turn into angels the minute you get rid of law enforcement? It sounds a bit cliched, but you have to understand human nature. I believe that most people are basically good, however you want to define good. The problem is that there are jackasses among us, and we have to contain them and keep them from harming the rest of us or impeding societal progress. There are absolutely critical decisions to be made in society today. In my opinion, for instance, and this is just a very partial list, we have to get rid of handguns and assault rifles. We have to make the rich pay vastly higher taxes. We have to stop this nonsense of charter schools and the privatization of education. We have to stop the digging up and the burning of fossil fuels. We have to reduce the human population. We have to pretty much eliminate the military intelligence surveillance apparatus, in other words, the Pentagon, the CIA, and the NSA. We have to stringently and effectively control corporations in all kinds of ways. There will be winners and losers in all of these decisions. There will not necessarily be a whole lot of compromise. And of course there will be virulent opposition from powerful forces to progressive measures such as these. Other thinking people will have somewhat different lists of the things they feel have to be done. But certainly society has to change drastically. We can't continue on the destructive, suicidal path we're on. The bottom line is that we, the citizens, have to assert control over our society and run it for the common good, rather than let it continue to be run by powerful interests for their selfish purposes. Whatever measures we finally decide on democratically, they have to be carried out decisively, or else what's the point? And this means that there will have to be effective governmental mechanisms to see that this is done. In sum, given the faulty anarchist ideas of so many occupiers, it's not all that surprising that Occupy did not go farther than it did, or that its appeal quickly dwindled. People want and need concrete solutions, not fairy tale appeals to peace, love, and understanding. So I'd like to talk very briefly about the second of the two dominant ideologies on the left and within Occupy, namely socialism. And more specifically, I'm alienating a lot of people tonight. I think, anyway. More specifically about the difference between socialism and democracy. A few months ago, I went to a forum on the environment held by a group named System Change, Not Climate Change. This was the same group that had organized the Earth Day rally at the Thompson Center a couple of days before. This group calls itself an eco-socialist coalition, and they're the kind of people that largely populated Occupy in its heyday. During the forum, I asked what specifically was the system they want to change. The answer was the capitalist system. So it's the country's economic system, not its political system, which is their primary concern. They call themselves Democrats, however, and talk constantly about democracy. And like many socialists, they would probably claim that socialism is democracy. More recently, I came to a College of Complexes lecture right here by David Steele, who spoke, among other things, about socialists' incessant condemnation of capitalism. Okay, you all remember that lecture just a few weeks ago. David Steele was here. He made the point that, as a matter of fact, regardless of whether you love capitalism or hate it, it's quite robust. It's a going concern. It's not going away anytime soon. So on the one hand, you have a left dominated by avowed anti-capitalists, with occupiers constantly ranting about capitalism and identifying it as the main problem we face. And on the other hand, you have a pretty much capitalist world. When I lived in LA quite a while ago, I would often drive for mile after mile on its long commercial streets and marvel at the endless rows of businesses, large and small. And of course, you can see this in Chicago and other large cities as well, but it was very striking in LA. Are anti-capitalists really going to condemn all these people involved in all these enterprises? The evidence suggests that business entrepreneurship, the creation and selling of products for gain, usually entailing the hiring of workers, is a pretty natural human activity. Obviously, there's a major disjuncture here. You can't be a populist, as leftists claim to be, and at the same time condemn what so many ordinary people do, and for the most part are content doing, namely running businesses or working in them. There are in fact major problems with socialism from a democratic point of view. First of all, what exactly is capitalism? And what exactly is the problem with it? Is it buying and selling, trade, domestic or international, money, private property in general, privately owned businesses in particular, corporations, profit making, the employer-employee relationship? The reality is that a doctrinaire, absolutist, anti-capitalist stance is a non-starter in American society, which is notoriously business-oriented. Many reasonable people, myself included, don't have a huge problem with capitalism as such. Our problem is with unregulated, out-of-control capitalism, especially finance monopoly capitalism, as opposed to competitive, small producer capitalism. There are all kinds of ways that capitalism, corporations, and the rich can be contained without eliminating capitalism altogether. Corporations and the rich can be made to pay much more in taxes and prevented from evading taxation. The antitrust laws can be enforced to prevent monopolies and oligopolies. Private for-profit insurance can be abolished. Stock trading can be taxed to prevent rampant speculation and undeserved profits. Dangerous financial instruments like derivatives can be prohibited. Executive pay can be curtailed. And this is a long list, and just a partial list. Unemployment can be eliminated by the government guaranteeing everyone a job. Unions can be encouraged rather than discouraged. Utilities and banks can be nationalized. Corporations can be made to pay for the damage they cause in the environment or prohibited from causing such damage in the first place. These kinds of controls are things that most people already agree with. They don't require getting rid of capitalism completely, which is something the vast majority of Americans don't favor. A second problem with the socialist obsession with capitalism, which of course is an economic phenomenon, is that because of this obsession, they generally have little or nothing to say about political systems or political power. In fact, many socialists don't have a problem with the representative system and its elitist electoralism. They would be quite content with socialists winning office in elections. In fact, they rejoice on the rare occasions when this occurs. For instance, what comes to mind is the socialist that was elected to the Seattle City Council. You know, it's like the world is, you know, built anew, according to socialists. They would be quite content, as I said, with socialists winning elections. Or, if they do reject representative politics, they turn not to democracy, but to authoritarianism or dictatorship. To heck with majority rule. They know the correct way to run society, especially the economy, and they'll put those policies in place regardless of public opinion. This attitude is a major reason why communist revolutions have always resulted in dictatorships. Another reason is the seemingly innocuous notion of the withering away of the state. Classical Marxism posits that after the victorious proletarian revolution, class conflict will disappear, and the state, which under capitalism was an instrument of class domination, will naturally disappear as well. In a post-capitalist world, people will agree on all basic things, and governmental functions will become unproblematic and routine, indeed automatic. There will no longer be any need for a large, power-wielding, coercive state. With this vision of a stateless utopia as an ideal, socialists see no great need to worry about forms of government. But as I explained earlier in relation to anarchism, these ideas are sheer nonsense. Conflict is inherent to society for the simple and inescapable reason that society is a vast collection of heterogeneous human beings with conflicting interests. The problem is not how to eliminate conflict, which is impossible, but how to resolve it and contain it and thereby maintain a civil, well-functioning society. And the way to do this is not by trying to wish away the state, but rather by instituting majority rule for a democratic state. There is no withering away of the state in democracy or any other society. And I'm just curious, have you all heard about this concept of the withering away of the state? Have you all read Marxism? Okay. But precisely because socialist regimes deny the need for and the inevitable emergence of a powerful state, they willy-nilly end up with the worst possible result, rank dictatorships. So there's in fact a huge difference between democracy and socialism, and you pretty much have to choose which one you prioritize. Democracy is a system of government, one consisting of certain specific political institutions that allow the people to rule themselves. Socialism, on the other hand, is basically a set of policy prescriptions, mainly economic. The logical priority here is 1, government, 2, policies, not the other way around. Governments formulate and enact policies. Policies don't fall out of the sky and implement themselves. Unless you plan to be a dictator, you need democracy to win your favorite policies. And yet many occupiers were more interested in socialism than democracy, to say the least. They were entranced by the individual issues and failed to see the imperative need to change, not just evade, the entire political system, the way things operate. In democracy, the people, not socialist rulers or technocrats, will democratically decide what to do about capitalism, whether to contain it, modify it, or eliminate it. If socialist policies are good for the people, and many are, they'll be adopted by the people. We have to confront our many deep problems and solve them ourselves. Dictatorship, even in the name of socialism, defeats the purpose of human freedom and results in an ungodly dystopian nightmare, as history has amply demonstrated. To sum up, the left has to get over both anarchism and socialism. I know this is asking a lot. These ideologies have been around a long time and they're deeply entrenched. But we need to embrace a new ideology, which I'll call democratism, which is democracy with an ism at the end. I think I've seen that word in print once, but I think it's a good word, and I think we need this. The belief that the most essential need of society is a concrete governmental system of power that enables the people to rule themselves. So far, I've spoken about occupiers' ideologies. I'd also like to say a few things about occupiers' main tactic after the occupation is ended, namely protest marches. Unless it grows to gargantuan proportions and has the explicit aim of overturning the state, protest is nothing more than a mode of petitioning for redress of grievances, something which is our explicit right, even under the current oligarchical regime. So there's nothing radical or revolutionary about run-of-the-mill protests in and of itself. Anti-abortionist protests, the KKK protests, the so-called Tea Party protests. Protest is nothing new. People have been protesting at least since the Middle Ages. Protesting is essentially people shouting at the rulers to do X or to not do Y. It generally doesn't change the structure of power or the political process. Within limits, the rulers of our current representative system don't actually have much of a problem with people protesting. They even invite it sometimes, because it allows people to let off steam. When millions of Americans protested the Iraq War, George W. Bush said, more or less, I'm paraphrasing, "That's great. That's people expressing their opinion. That's democracy." Oligarchical governments like ours expect people to resist their decisions at times, but that doesn't mean they don't retain ultimate power, or that they won't keep on making decisions that defy public opinion. Protest is mostly political theater. It's part of the game. I drive a cab for a living. And oftentimes, the day after a protest, I'll be driving down State Street on Michigan Avenue, and where there had been a march, or I'll pass by the Federal Plaza or Daily Plaza where there had been a rally, and I'll reflect that everything looks perfectly normal. People and businesses are going about their usual routines. Government officials are in their offices carrying on the business of government as always. It's business as usual, as if nothing had happened. And the reality is that in effect, nothing did happen. A few people came together to make some noise for a couple of hours and then went home. So what? The fact of the matter is that protests don't significantly change the way things operate. Protesters are like sheep running around yelling at wolves to not be wolves, but leaving them in charge. Surprise, surprise, the next day the wolves are still wolves, doing what wolves do. Leftist commentators often bring up the women's suffrage movement and the civil rights movement as examples of successful revolution through protest. In fact, there was nothing revolutionary about these movements. They didn't change the structure of government one iota. They just let more people into the same game. So now you have female voters and black voters alongside white male voters, electing female politicians and black politicians along with white male politicians to serve the billionaires and screw the people. This greater inclusiveness is indeed a cultural blow to overt sexism and racism, but politically it's superficial. It's not radical change. It certainly didn't eliminate structural sexism and racism, which, as with mass incarceration of black men, continue in more subtle and devious forms under the reigning plutocracy. Has anybody read Michelle Alexander's book,
The New Jim Crow?
The New Jim Crow? That's a superb book. You won't read that book and think that racism is dead in this country, regardless of Barack Obama. If you don't have revolutionary aims, even humongous protests can be useless. Right now in Egypt, the so-called revolution there is back to square one. Why is this? Because the initial uprising didn't have a democratic agenda. The protesters really wanted free elections. When they got them and the Muslim Brotherhood was voted into power, they found that this was no good. So they called the military back in to overthrow the obnoxious elected government. And now they're as far from democracy as ever. Finally, turning to democracy in the USA, our principal strategy at the moment is to oppose voting in elections. We believe that the current representative system is not only rotten and corrupt, but fundamentally and irretrievably undemocratic. If we want to seriously change this country and the world, we have to stop participating in this system.
Yes, sir.
And the main way that we're asked to participate is by voting. Although our rulers compete among themselves for our votes, they care less who we vote for than that we play the game and vote. The two major parties just take turns. Voting Republican is obviously voting for corporate and elite rule, but so is voting Democratic, just in a slightly different flavor. The Democratic Party is beholden to Wall Street through and through. Just look at Obama's cabinet appointments. They're a bunch of corporatists. And there's all kinds of evidence that Obama and the administration are basically conservative or middle-of-the-road Republicans. They're not quote-unquote Democratic, Democratic Party people, as many think. Even voting third party is playing the plutocrats game. Everyone knows they don't have a snowball chance in hell of winning any significant number of major offices, since they don't have the necessary corporate backing. So the whole electoral business is a colossal sham. The winners in election campaigns will almost exclusively be rich people and tools of rich people, no matter who you vote for. election after election after election. A handful of progressives will make it into the ruling club. All the better to trick you into thinking that voting is the path to a new world. It's not. Elite rule is the intended outcome of the electoral process. From the beginning of this nation, the anti-federalists pointed out that voting is a waste of time for ordinary people. The game is rigged. Plutocracy is built into our Constitution. What we need is an entirely new Constitution, a new political system. We describe this system in detail on our website, democracyforusa.org. I'll just say for now that what a real democracy is, it consists of two institutions basically. One, a network of community assemblies of all the citizens as the legislative body, and two, a set of random sample councils as the agenda-setting executive body. With these two institutions, the people will actually rule themselves, entirely without politicians beholden to the rich and the corporations. Thank you.
All right, now we'll get into the question and answer session. So, all right, now okay. Did you have something you wanted to hand out?
All right. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what. What should we do? Just take one and pass them on.
Okay. What we're passing out right now is our latest flyer. We gave this out at a couple of actions, and it explains in a very succinct way our program, and it has our website on it, Democracy for USA. Thanks again.
All right.
Okay.
Thank
All right.
you. Wow.
Time.
All right. All right. Now who's got? Oh, listen, Ted. You're going to have to answer the questions here. So you're still on.
He's an
Would you like one?
All right. Who's got a question? Okay. Go ahead, sir.
How can
But you're okay?
anarchist be from the left
You're okay.
when an anarchist is really against most of the government controls?
Huh?
That seems to be a lot more of the right.
Well, yeah, in a way,
Okay,
anarchism
I'm just gonna
is
here,
kind of
can you
to
take
the
it
right.
out there?
As a matter of fact, anarchism and libertarianism
Here.
are closely related, and some people consider that to be going right from a left perspective. Right? Here's my left hand, right? And some people, think, well, anarchists and libertarians are leftists, right? But they go so far that they kind of come over to the right side of the spectrum because of their individualistic, anti-government views.
I agree with them. Okay, being an anarchist, but I am no close to the left.
Okay. All right. Do you have a question, Dave?
Yeah, that's why I raised my hand.
Oh. I thought maybe you raised your hand because you had a comment. But go ahead.
During the Carnegie era, anarchists were throwing bombs. So I don't seem to think that what you're saying about anarchists being peaceful and not getting involved, they got very much involved throwing bombs, did they not?
Okay, most anarchists are peaceful people, and mostly engage in peaceful protest. First of all, in that incident, the Haymarket incident you're talking about, they don't even know who threw bombs. It could have been provocateurs.
Excuse me, but I was actually thinking more in terms of when the guy went into the building where, in order to shoot Andrew Mellon, he killed another guy.
It wasn't that.
And
Andrew
there were
Carnegie.
several other incidents back in the Carnegie era, which was, I think, before the Haymarket era.
Right, okay. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Historically, there have been a handful of anarchists who have done this, what they call, revolution by the deed, where they individually will go and shoot a president or whoever, right? But that is, by definition, an individual act. The vast majority of anarchists, if you look at it historically, if you look at, what Occupy did, are peaceful protesters at most. They don't take violent action against anybody. There have been a whole lot more people killed by police, killing innocent protesters, than anarchists killing anybody.
Okay. Anybody other questions? Oh, Mike, go ahead.
Could you just repeat those last two things you said about the two principles? One, I think, was a group of organizations trying to get together to put people in office or something like that. And then some kind of a new responsible agenda.
Yeah.
Just repeat those two things.
Okay. Sure.
Yes, I'm gonna fill it up.
The two major institutions of an actual democracy. Okay, and you can find this on our website with explanations and illustrations, and I have some copies as well. If you all want to, I didn't bring enough for everybody, but you can get them from me, and I'll give you one. The first institution is a whole bunch of community assemblies throughout the country, and everybody's involved. So all the citizens together are the legislative body. They make the laws, they decide policies. The second institution is random sample councils, executive councils. In other words, it's like the lottery, or the lot. Another term is sortition. People are selected into these councils just by chance. So that you don't have elections where people run, and say, look at me, I'm the best. No, these councils will be literally microcosms of the entire community. And this concept, by the way, goes way back to not only to the Athenians, but to the anti-federalists at the founding of this country. They thought that this should be the way that, or that the government should be much more representative of the people. So since most people are poor, the government should be should consist of more ordinary people, not just rich people, like it does now.
So if I may cut in, it sounds like this idea of selection by lot for representatives would kind of resemble the way juries are selected right now. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
it's the same principle.
Okay. All right. Now somebody. Oh, Don. Go ahead.
Yes, if I heard you right, you wanted the Constitution to be changed or what?
Yes, or completely changed, yes. This Constitution right now is an oligarchical constitution. That's why we have millionaires in Congress. Congress is a millionaires club. The president is a rich person more often than not. The Supreme Court isn't even elected at all. It's literally an oligarchy. It's like 500-600 people who run the country. This country of 300 million people.
All right. Tim, did you have a question?
Yeah, this might be a little cynical, but also in a half seriousness. How would your philosophy handle such things as traffic court and parking tickets?
There would be a bureaucracy run by, overseen by the executive councils. The executive councils would have agencies, administrations, police. The executive councils would run a full bureaucracy that would do exactly those kinds of routine things.
All right. Oh, wait. Ellen, did you have your hand up? You did have your hand up.
Jane,
No
they're
question.
okay tonight, sweetheart, okay?
Oh.
I'd like to remind everybody to speak loudly so we can get the sound on the mic.
Okay, Ellen, go ahead.
Okay, my question is, right now, we have certain protections for minorities with a Bill of Rights, and that guarantees that, even though we have a majority, they can't decide, let's just kill all the Latinos or whatever they decide. How would your form of government address that kind of issue of the majority persecuting the minority?
In this country, there is no majority persecuting the minority. There are elites, like Barack Obama, not quite killing Latinos, but deporting them in record numbers right now. Right now, our elitist government has practically a form of slavery going, with like a third of the young black male population either in jail or on parole or whatever in the quote-unquote criminal system. That's what we have now. Okay, there has not been a majority ruling in this country or any country since Athens, and even then it was just the citizens that ruled. But it would be an entirely different system. There is no majority rule right now. So there is no majority persecution in this country.
Okay, Gene, did you have a question?
Yeah, I read started reading this. Of course, I can't read this light, but it says call Barack Obama and Rahm Emanuel and tell them to resign. Did you do that, and what answer did you get?
That's a rhetorical statement, right? I am not going to bother to call Barack Obama and Rahm Emanuel, but I am saying that they should resign if they want to make this, if we want to make this a democracy, we have to get rid of these quote-unquote elected officials. We have to get rid of elections. We have to get rid of this whole system, which is an oligarchy. That's what I'm saying in that statement.
Thank you.
All right, Mark, did you have a question? Okay.
Dan, you mean?
Oh, Dan, I'm sorry, Dan.
Hi, Dan. I was wondering, these councils that you have all over the country, in Seattle, in Florida, in Chicago, and New York,
Right.
these people are gonna vote in the councils for a representative,
No,
right?
no,
No?
no.
How will they choose somebody?
They won't be choosing people. They'll be choosing policies, and they'll be deciding issues.
They'll be deciding issues. So will they be deciding on governors and mayors? or-
There will be no governors and mayors.
There will be.
No, those are elites. They're oligarchs. They're the current version of kings.
One more question.
Yeah.
Did this society ever, was this the way Athens was?
Yeah,
was
basically,
governed?
yeah. People would gather in the assembly, the Athenian assembly, in the thousands, and they would discuss whatever issues were on the table. And those issues, by the way, were made by the Council of 500, which was a random sample executive council of 500 citizens. And they would make the agenda, the council would, and present it to the assembly, and the people would decide whether or not they wanted to go to war with Sparta, or whether or not they wanted to build a Parthenon or any other building, et cetera, et cetera. That's what democracy is. Democracy is not about voting for governors, mayors, or presidents. In a democracy, there are no such things as those people.
Okay, all right, Charlie, did you have a question?
Yeah, Ted. In the Independent Voters of Illinois, we spend an awful lot of time reviewing candidate credentials and voting record and position on issues. And according to you, I guess we should send all back their applications to our endorsements and say, oh, you're nothing but a bunch of all plutocrats?
Yeah, that'd be a good idea.
Okay.
We're not going to do this anymore?
Okay, all right, let's move in, Ayala, did you have a question?
Yeah, it's a two-phase question. First of all, what is your opinion about Lawrence Lessig, professor of law, involvement now in politics as far as eliminating the system, changing the constitution to get money out of the election process? Because you still believe in representation. And
Who decided?
you.
What kind of
You talked about
representation?
the council. I mean, there would be some representation enforcing the law,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And also, I think you didn't really address Alan's question, brushing it off by saying that it didn't happen in this country. First of all, it happened many places in the world before, but even in this country, when we came, is that the
Ayala,
comment?
this is a question, it's not a comment. You can, I
I'll
don't,
keep it for later.
sure.
Okay.
All right,
Well, I
Ayala.
have to answer.
Okay, go ahead, I'm sorry.
That's
My
okay,
bad.
that's okay.
Okay.
Getting money out of politics in this system has proven to be pretty much impossible. Because this system is run by the elite. It's run by rich politicians, mostly rich politicians, who answer to even richer people, namely the billionaires, the Koch brothers. You know ALEC, okay, American Legislative Exchange Council. They have an extensive program of taking control over many state legislatures. And they literally take the congressmen out to, or resorts, and literally feed them the legislation, okay? I just read an article, I think it was in yesterday's Tribune, about the Clintons, both Hillary and even more so Bill Clinton, making hundreds of millions of dollars on speaking, by speaking, and charging exorbitant fees. This is money, okay? These people run by money. And as long as we have this system where we elect these people to office, that's how it's going to be. So you have to change the entire system. To get to another point that you made about representation, the representation that we're talking about in an actual democracy is an entirely different kind of quote-unquote representation. You don't vote for representatives. The people in the executive councils represent you because they are like you. If you have, a largely poor and middle-class society, that's who's going to be in the executive councils, poor people and middle-class people. There will be very few rich people in a democratically chosen executive council by sortition.
All right, we got a lot of hands up.
Okay.
Let's just, all right, first of all, Bram, you had your hand up earlier than the others, so you go ahead.
Well, let's see. It seems to me that it's sort of the system that you propose is a non-starter because people do not jump to not exactly chaos, but a system proposed councils and so on that don't exist
Well, Bram, this is do you have a question?
Yes, that's part of the question. The question is, how do you move from the society you have to a differently organized society, and how is it really different? Why wouldn't elites be generated by the system?
Well, you move from one side to another, first of all, I think, by presenting the alternative in a fairly concrete, rational way. You say, okay, here's, and also analyzing and describing the current system. Okay, here's the current system. Here's what it's like, these are the institutions, and here's the result that you get, politically speaking. And then you present the other system. And you say, this is an alternative system. These are the institutions, here's how they're different, and here's why you would have a different result. So that's the first step, I would think, is to present the alternative system in a relatively concrete fashion, which is something that many leftists don't do. They complain about the current system, but they neither analyze the current system correctly, nor present an alternative in a fairly rational, concrete fashion.
Okay.
And by the way, if you go to our, anybody here, if you go to our website, I didn't want to just take a whole lot of time to describe the system that I'm talking about here, because it's a little bit complicated. But if you go to our website, you'll see it laid out very clearly, I think.
Okay, all right,
Yeah,
Dominic, you, wait, just a second, Sid, go ahead.
Yeah, you're talking about democracy. I think the best definition is what Lincoln gave, of, by, and for the people. Outside of primitive societies, could you name one country in all of civilization that ever had democracy? People talk about Greece was based on slavery. Give me one example.
Okay, Greece.
It's not democracy.
Hold on, let me answer you. Greece was an area. It had many city-states. It wasn't one country. Athens was one of many city-states in ancient Greece. Athens had a citizen body of tens of thousands of people, and they got together and decided on issues by themselves. And as I explained, there was an executive council, the Council of 500, which gave them the agenda in their assemblies. That is a democratic model. That's a democratic system. There were slaves in Athens. Today, there would not be slaves, obviously. Okay, so I think it's a red herring when people criticize Athens and say, well, they had slaves. Well, we wouldn't have slaves today. We could have the same system, literally the same or very similar system.
Today you got wage slavery.
Wait,
What's the
one full at a time. Okay, go ahead, Ted.
Wage slavery, that's something different. We're not talking about chattel slavery, people owning other people. That's a whole nother discussion.
Okay. Now, let's see. Charlie had his hand up before.
The guy over there.
Okay. Yes, you, sir. Oh, did you have a question, sir?
Yeah. Maybe just follow on Brown's comments. Like U.S. Constitution, you think it has to be overhauled, changed completely. I think the Constitution, it's not set in stone. There's a procedure to change it, to modify, to add. But you have to vote first. I just wonder what's the practical way you are proposing to change the Constitution?
What do you mean? This change that I'm envisioning, okay, or proposing, would actually take place at the end of a revolutionary movement. There's obviously no such revolutionary movement right now. This is the very beginning stage of what I would hope would become that kind of movement. So the first thing that would have to happen is not people voting. I'm saying that that's exactly the wrong thing to do. The first thing that would have to happen is for more people to look at this system that I'm proposing and say, yeah, that makes sense. And to agree that what we have is an oligarchy. Okay? Before you change anything, you have to know what it is. Or before you would even want to change something, you would have to know what it is. Once you understand that this country is an oligarchy, that this political system is an oligarchy, then you're going to start thinking, well, okay, what would democracy be like? Or do we even want a democracy? And then you'd have to study, democratic systems. And I'm proposing a democratic system. So if you look at this system that I'm proposing, and many other people do, that'll be the first baby steps on the road to changing the system. I don't have a concrete plan about what's going to happen 5 or 10 years from now.
Okay, all right, Ed, did you have a question?
Yeah. Most people don't really want to participate in government. They have their own lives, their own everything. I mean, life is busy enough. Okay? And in the sense that, so in your system, does your system allow for non-participation? Or do you force participation?
No, nobody's forced.
And if you have non-participation, which most people tend to do, aren't you just left with an oligarchy?
No. No, nobody's going to be, okay, in Athens, nobody was forced to go to the assembly. People ended up going to the assembly because it was a useful thing to do. When you can go to a sovereign assembly and say what you want done in government, and if you're a sensible person, there will probably be a lot of people who think, who agree with you on policy X, Y, or Z, that you can actually get something done. But nobody's forced to go to any assembly. Now, if it ends up that relatively few people do go to assemblies, they're the ones that are going to have their policies enacted, right? But it's still the people. Where would these oligarchs be? There would be no oligarchy. There would be no...
I mean oligarchy in the terms of very few people who go to the assembly are the ones that rule. It's still ruled by very few people.
Okay, well, we have to... okay, what do you mean by very few people? The government of the United States at the federal level is like 500, 600 people. Okay, you have Congress 435, Senate, or rather the House of Representatives 435, the Senate 100, 9 Supreme Court justices and 1 president. That's like 535 people or something like that, right? Even if quote unquote few people went to assemblies in a democratic United States, when you have assemblies in every community in the country, we're talking about probably tens of thousands of assemblies. Even if one person went to each assembly, that's already 10,000 people. But realistically, it would be many, many people. So it would be a whole different story, even if not everybody went to the assemblies, which you wouldn't expect.
Okay, a lot of hands up. Sir, did you have a question?
Just go to an assembly, that's all.
Yes, go ahead.
You sound very vaguely utopian. In today's United States, we have a merger of corporate influence and government. How would you separate the two, and how would you democratize these global corporations, which you spoke nothing about?
What do you mean by democratized corporations?
Well, you seem to defend capitalism as a system, economic system, but you're not talking about how to democratize corporations, which today control our government on all levels.
Okay, democracy, as far as I'm concerned, is a political concept. And to democratize something means to change the political system. And that's why I look at our government and say, well, that's not a democracy. We have to create an actual democracy. corporations are a whole other entity, a whole other set of entities.
They
Actually,
control the government today.
that's
You say
because
so yourself?
that's because they control this kind of government. The government, an actual democracy, would control corporations. Okay, by doing whatever you want to do. If all of us here, if this was an assembly, okay, we would change corporate activity radically overnight.
How?
I explained. I had a long list of things that we could do to change corporations, to change their behavior.
Okay,
They won't even let you on the
hold
board.
hold on. This is not a time to have an argument. We need, there's a lot of other people that have questions.
I like
that want to
arguments.
ask.
Let me just say one thing to this, okay? A democratic government has power, and the people have power. And with power, you can actually do things, and you can do things to corporations.
Like how, what?
That's
Okay, well, let's move on to the next question. Now, Dominic, I know you had your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, Ted, you mentioned issues and policies. Can you tell us how this way of government would create a law?
Okay. You have assemblies, people get together, okay? And prior to that, you would have an executive council that sets an agenda. And the executive council, being ordinary people, would have things on their mind, like, okay, we should get out of Iraq completely, okay? Right now, President Obama or the administration is sending people to Iraq, okay? So right there, you would have a specific policy that people could say, okay, we're not going to send any more troops to Iraq. And the Executive Council would have a law or a policy, a proposition that it would give to the assemblies. And people all over the country would see this on the agenda and they would say, okay, we're going to decide on this. And they would decide whether or not we're going to send people to Iraq. And that's just one example of countless examples of people deciding to do X, Y, or Z. It's not that complicated.
Okay. Okay, Mark, did you have a question?
How do you propose to convert the wolves to allow this to happen?
That's a very good question. You do not convert wolves. You get them out of power. You don't change wolves. In fact, that's the whole point.
Let me rephrase
Sure.
the question. What do you do about the wolves that are in power that will somehow allow this process to make the change?
Could you repeat that?
There are people with great amounts of power now.
Yeah.
In order to make a
Right.
change in the Constitution, you've got to have 3/4 of the states, I believe, to ratify the change made to the Constitution.
Okay, you don't work to change this Constitution through this Constitution. Well, let me put it this way. If you want to replace this Constitution entirely, if you want to scrap it, if you want to say this whole business is a bunch of nonsense, okay? All these institutions, Congress, President, this is bullshit, okay? You don't go through that system to change it. You have to get rid of it. For instance, I'm not in favor of any communist revolution, but the Russian Revolution, for instance, okay, they got rid of the Tsar completely. They didn't go to the Tsar and say, would you please do this, or how many votes do you need to, blah, blah, blah. No, they got rid of this system.
Well, no, okay,
Gentlemen,
all right,
well.
now, hold on.
Can I just have a follow-up on that?
Okay, fine.
I guess I didn't state my question. How do you propose to see this thing happening? Are you proposing violence?
No. I'm proposing, like I explained earlier, first of all, for people to start to understand what we have, an oligarchy, and to understand what an alternative system would be, a democracy. That's the first step. The next steps, I'm not so sure about. We don't even have a movement going on this change that I'm proposing. You have to first start that.
All right, sir, did you have a question?
Yes, I think in a small sense, something like that is happening already in town hall meetings, like in New England. When I went to Vermont, many small towns have meetings that decide policies, and they override bureaucrats and so on. But in Russia, what was interesting, they formed Soviets in the factories and on the farms, and these became self-governing entities, and we had a dual power situation.
All right, sir, did you have a question?
That's the question. I'm trying to answer. I think he's trying to answer as well. It's going to be a dual power situation where you set up dual forms of government, and one will supersede the other.
Okay, well, wait, this is a time for,
okay.
that would be a good rebuttal speech, this is a time for
Well,
questions. Okay.
let me address that briefly. In New England, you do have town meetings, and that is a somewhat, that's something of a model of democracy. The difference between that and an actual democracy is that you wouldn't vote, you wouldn't meet just once a year. I believe New England town meetings are like once a year. And they largely elect, like, I don't know if they call them mayors or whatever, but they do elect leaders of people.
They elect select.
Okay, whatever they
They're
are.
called the selectmen. There's usually, it's not one, it's usually, it's a group. And they're responsible for administration of public goods.
Right. So,
like the schools and
right. So it's partly a representative system, but people meeting and deciding on policies, that is in a democratic direction for sure. The Soviets were purely representative. People elected representatives. What were they called in Soviets? I don't know what they would be called. Councilors, or whatever. So that was not democratic. That was not, as far as I'm concerned, from my definition, it wasn't a democratic system. It was a representative system.
All right. All right. Now, Ilana, do you have a question?
Okay, I will try. Very quick. My first question, I don't understand. Do you like oligarch or you not like oligarch? It's my question. And small remark. This is country opportunity with nothing wrong with oligarchs, because oligarchs work very, very hard to accomplish to be oligarchs. Capitalistic system, I guess, allowed, right? They have opportunity to work hard and have what life, working hard. So I'm not against oligarchs. I'm for oligarchs, and they probably will give society. Thank you. And my question, do you like oligarch or you against oligarch? Thank you.
Okay. I think we have probably a somewhat different definition of oligarchs.
Because we came a little bit later, so I didn't hear your speech.
Okay. When I say oligarchs, I mean people, rulers, people who are members of the government. I'm not talking about capitalists. I'm not talking about rich people. I'm not talking about people who worked hard, made X amount of money or whatever. I'm not talking about business leaders or whatever. Oligarchs are members of the ruling class, okay, and that is led basically by the government.
Right.
Yeah. So we have, I think, a slightly different definition.
All right. All right. Now, who else? Paul.
hot water,
Go ahead.
I believe in your speech
Right
you
here,
said
right
that
here.
there were 10,000 communities in America, or something like that. I think 10,000 would be kind of a small number myself. But anyway, let's say there are these 10,000 community groups that get together and they decide what they want to do. How would these groups be aggregated, say at a state and or federal level?
Okay. They wouldn't be aggregated. You would have community assemblies in every, or you'd have assemblies in every community in the U.S. I calculated it in Chicago. I forget, it's on our website. There would be, I don't know, there are like 100 communities, quote-unquote neighborhoods. Like if you look at it as a neighborhood map of Chicago, you see roughly 100 neighborhoods. And you could have a council, or rather an assembly in each of those. And then you replicate that for every city and every county in the country. And I don't know what the number would be. I'm not saying it's exactly 10,000. They would be tens of thousands. So you wouldn't aggregate the community assemblies. You would have councils, executive councils, random sample executive councils at the community level, at the county, the area level, cities or counties, and then at state level, and then at the national level.
All right. We've got time for another round of questions now. Carl, you haven't had a question.
Right.
Go ahead.
I got a for instance or example, and maybe you can tell me how this would work. Well, let's say, okay, we have Lake Michigan right here, right? And what if, like, the whole rest of the western United States decided we want clean
$2
water,
dessert?
we want a pipeline, and they all decided, that we need water.
This is
but we
cheesecake,
don't wanna
strawberry
give them the
roast,
water,
walnut?
Okay. How would you, obviously you would have huge conflicts.
I got another one in the cooler, I'll get it.
And the rest of the people wanted the clean water.
Okay, that's by definition a national issue. It doesn't concern just one state. So you would have the community at the community assemblies throughout the country. you would have an agenda item asking,
Let me go
what
get
do we
you a
want to do
fresh one.
about water from the Great Lakes? Do we want to send it over to California or whatever, okay? So people throughout the country would decide on this national issue.
And if they did, let's say they wanted the water, and we don't want to give them, or we want.
Whatever the people decide at the national level is what is done at the national level.
Okay. All right, now, we have
I have
time
a
for a second
follow-up
round of
question.
questions, y'all. Wait, who has a?
I have a follow-up
Okay,
question.
go ahead, Paul.
Okay. You said that, okay, you have community level, then you have city level, county level, councils. How are the opinions, the communities all say this, how are those opinions? Would they then send a representative to the city government, and then all the cities get together, and they send a representative to the county session, and then all the counties get together and send, that sounds like the government we have now.
No, that's not how it would work. Each council would be selected randomly. Okay, there would be no representatives being sent anywhere. You would have a lottery system that would choose, and that's how the council would be chosen. All the communities would have councils, so there would be tens of thousands of them. All the states would have councils, that's only 50 of them, and there would be one council for the country.
But how would the opinions of the people be passed from one level to the next then?
The people will decide everything at the community assemblies.
Yeah, but then how is that transmitted to the state, the cities, the counties, the states, and the federal?
Okay, at the community assemblies, there would be a four-part agenda. There would be national issues, state issues, area issues, and community issues. And when people would decide, and in all the communities throughout the country, when they decide on their community issues on the agenda, they would transmit those decisions to their community counterparts. When they decide, whatever they decide on the state issues on the agenda at the community assemblies, they would send that to the state council, and likewise with the national council. So that's how it would work. There would not be representatives being sent anywhere.
So it'd be just paper sent back and forth.
Communication, yeah.
Okay, now Andy, I don't think you had a question.
No, I
Go
don't have
ahead.
one yet. I have a question. In your system, how would you deal with the corporate criminals that are currently running our government? Or if corporate criminals in general rise to the top, and the laws aren't being enforced right now. We have criminals openly running our country.
Right.
Do you have any plan to deal with that?
I don't have any plans for what people would do about anything. My proposition is that ordinary people, like us in this room, okay, would decide what to do with corporate criminals. And I think we know what we would do with those darn guys, right? And that's it. In a democracy, the people decide on what to do about anything. And they would decide what to do about criminals, corporate criminals and other criminals. I don't have I have an opinion, but you can't ask me what a democracy is going to do. The people will decide what to do.
All right, who else has a question? Okay, go ahead, Dave.
You made a statement earlier against speculation. If there is no speculation, then men like Bill Gates, who had an idea and put together a new kind of computer in his garage, and he became a billionaire, and thousands of other people became millionaires, and everybody was able to have a special kind of computer, and many others like that. How then would there ever be room for any kind of new ideas to be developed and put into practice?
Okay. Capitalists or entrepreneurs, as far as I know, don't depend, at least not that much, on speculation. And what I said, actually, I looked it up, is rampant speculation. The kind of speculation where these guys, have these supercomputers that watch the stock market, And by these computers choosing stocks or selling stock, buying, selling stocks, in other words, by doing it within a millionth of a second, okay, they can beat other speculators who have slower computers or whatever. You've probably heard of this, right? Have you all heard about this kind of trading nowadays? Yeah. It's nothing but a technological game. It has nothing to do with ideas about products. This wouldn't have stopped Bill Gates from doing what he did. Bill Gates didn't depend on this. True inventors like Thomas Edison didn't depend on this kind of nonsense. But the main thing, though, is that's just my personal opinion about what should be done about speculation. What I want to see is a democracy where you and everybody else, the citizenry, decides what to do about speculation. They can study the problem, okay, and decide what to do about it. I'm not just going to be deciding what to do about anything.
All right, Charles, did you have a question?
Yeah, now Ted, you rode up and down this street and you saw all these stores. I imagine, let's say there were a lot of shoe stores. And you said, oh, that's okay. A lot of nice shoe stores selling stuff made by children from China. Why don't we have one nationalized shoe industry where you go, if you need a pair of shoes, you say, a shoe repository and get a pair of shoes where people are paid a living decent wage. I mean, but you went up and down the block, it's so that's okay.
Did you read Edward Bellamy's Looking Backward? Did you read that book? That's not right out of that book. And that might be a good idea. But all I'm saying is that people should decide, the people in general should decide what to do about the way the economy is structured, the way it's regulated. What kinds of businesses to have, how many businesses to have. When I made that statement, my point was that this anti-capitalist, drubbing that goes on the left doesn't square with all these people, okay, probably the vast majority who, first of all, run businesses and go to work every day, and for the most part, like their lives. Not everybody, like the people that work in this restaurant, are so hot to get rid of this capitalist restaurant. Okay, they come to work and they do their work, and they're fairly content. So my own point is.
Wait a minute, I'm not going to belabor. There's nothing good about selling cheap plastic shit from China made by children by clerks who pay minimum wage.
Well, look,
and they're not happy.
I wasn't advocating cheap shit from China. Okay, I was talking about businesses. You could have businesses that have all American-made products. You could pass a law.
This is a true example of one of your leftists.
Hey, one fool at a time!
Oh, I'm so happy I'm selling shoes at minimum wage.
Charlie, you're out of order. All right, Ellen.
I'd love to see that 18-year-old girl try Charlie's
Jen,
system.
Jen, that goes for you too. Go ahead, Ellen.
Yeah, that's our
I
moderator.
have a couple questions. The first is back to what I was talking about before. Even if you were to suppose, which I think is unlikely, but like, the whole reason for the Bill of Rights is because there was a fear that the majority, I mean, democracy means rule of the majority, is my understanding. There was a fear that the majority would oppress the minority. So, even assuming that hasn't happened, which I think is unlikely, I think it would be pretty easy to, I mean, people are very emotional. In World War II in Germany, there was a huge propaganda campaign and people got swayed into these ideas that it was okay to kill Jews and all sorts of things. There was a exhibit at the Museum of Science and Industry about it, or one of those things. But it's pretty easy to assume human nature being the way it is and people being kind of emotionally swayed and irrational, that the majority could have oppressed the minority, even with these councils. So my question is, do you believe could there be a Bill of Rights with this system of yours, or you just totally get rid of that idea?
Okay, a Bill of Rights.
Thank you, sweetheart.
Okay, let me.
Or some kind of protections against the minority.
Okay, what I think.
Because I think it's easy to imagine that the majority
Okay.
oppress the minority.
Okay, let me start to answer that question.
Okay.
The majority that the founders were concerned about, and the oppression that the founders were concerned about, was ordinary people, the farmers, the yeomen, oppressing the elite, the rich. That was the oppression that the founders were concerned about. And Madison and others said so explicitly. If you read the documents during the time of the founding, when they were...
The Federalist Papers?
Yeah, exactly. Read Federalist number 10, and especially number 10, and number 51. And you'll see that, and that's on our website also, by the way. We have a section on the anti-federalist or the federalist, anti-federalist arguments. That was the oppression that the founders were concerned about. That was the quote-unquote tyranny of the minority, of the majority that they were concerned about. Germany didn't have a democracy. Hitler and his coterie, okay, the Nazi Party, went wild with these crazy ideas about killing the Jews or whatever the heck, you know. The German people did not decide on that. So you didn't have, that wasn't an example of the majority oppressing the minority at all.
But can't you imagine that? The majority oppressing the minority?
All right.
My definition of oppression is almost, by definition, minorities oppressing majorities. People should be able to do what they want.
Minorities oppressing majorities?
Yes, that's almost by definition what I consider oppression. I think that people should be able to decide democratically what to do. So that the majority should be able to decide what to do. A majority of Americans should be able to do whatever they want to do. So, and I want to give them the power to do that. And getting to your question or your point about the Bill of Rights. Once Americans have power, they can list any rights they want, they can make any laws they want. You won't have to have this sacrosanct Bill of Rights, which today is almost useless anyway. Look at the Fourth Amendment, okay? The administration with the NSA we have no Fourth Amendment for all practical purposes. We only have the First Amendment. You have these pens where you have these protesters, you have these free speech zones, quote unquote. I mean, our Bill of Rights hardly does us any good, and the reason is we don't have power. When the people will have power, they will be able to do what they want, and you'll have a much better society.
Very sweet.
Well, all right. Ed, did you have a question?
Yeah, there was something recently passed in New York State concerning fracking, where each community now can decide whether within its community borders fracking will be allowed or not. And then you'll have right now the controversy of same-sex marriage or not. All right, some communities support it, and some communities don't support it. And then you have just pollution controls, let's say, where some communities would be like, view these things differently. In your system, like, how would these differences play out?
Okay, fracking, I think that would be fairly simple, I think, because that is a national question. Fracking is not going on in one or two communities in this country.
Well, the communities will get together, as you had suggested.
Yeah, right.
The communities individually in New York State will vote on whether they want fracking or not, as you suggested, and they expect to have different results, just as they expect to have different results for gay marriages. How does this come out in the wash?
Okay, but that's what I'm answering. I'm answering exactly what you're getting at. Fracking is a national issue, so you have it on the national agenda. And people in many states, in fact throughout the country, would decide whether or not we want fracking. I'm sure if we had a democracy tomorrow, fracking would be one of the top agenda items in the entire country. And people would decide whether or not we want fracking. We want to do fracking as a country. So whatever some idiots in some little town who are being promised, riches by this fracking company, they might decide, well, sure, I'll give you my land and you can frack on my land because I'll be rich tomorrow, which is a bunch of bullshit anyway. They would not decide about fracking as a whole. It would be taken pretty much out of the hands of these individual communities who might profit from fracking, because fracking is a national issue. So that would be solved probably overnight. Same-sex marriage, the people as a whole, that's another national issue. These kinds of questions, discrimination or non-discrimination, like same-sex marriage, would be decided at the national level. And you just go with what the majority decides.
All right. Before I'll get to you next, Ellen, but unless somebody, but before I'd like to ask a couple of questions myself. Now, first of all,
Thank you, my friend.
all right. You mentioned earlier in your lecture, Ted,
Thank you, sir.
that we need to reduce the human population. How would you propose to do that?
Okay, this is another one of those questions about what would I do. I propose when I made that list, when I read that list to you, my point was that there are critical issues that we as a society have to decide, the whole world, much less the United States. Okay. Population and population growth, I think, should be on the agenda of a societal democracy. I'm not going to bother telling you what I think should be done about population. My point when I bring those kinds of things up is that those kinds of issues are critical issues that we should, as a society, should be talking about, should be deciding. Right now, nothing is being done about many such critical issues because we have no power to do anything about them. And the powers that be, the actual rulers, they couldn't care less about population growth. They're making money.
All right. Now, okay, Ellen, go ahead.
Okay.
I'll get to you next.
Okay. I think this issue is one of the many critical issues about your system of government. Namely, I think, and I think currently it's very tricky to figure out, which issues should be decided on local issue, which should be considered on state level, which should be considered on national level. And I'm assuming that this will be a continual issue. Some people are going to think that the fracking should be a local issue, and some people are going to think it should be more of a state issue, and some are going to think it should be a national issue. Now, the issue of, for example, abortion, I've heard a critique that some people are claiming that we should not have made that a national issue. That should be a more local issue, and that's why there's all this endless contention, is because there's national policy about it, which are basically being ignored. I just want to say it's basically being ignored because there's states that only have like one abortion clinic. But what do you think about this issue of how are you going to decide which things are going to go on a national level, a state, or federal, or local level? And converse also with that, do you think the United States should be smaller? Because it's so big, it's such diverse interests.
Okay. The items on the agenda will be decided by the councils at each level, right? And the national level would have the trump card, more or less. If the National Council, I use the number 500 because that was the Athenian number of the Council of 500. If the National Council of 500 decides that abortion should be decided at the national level, that appears on the agenda of all community assemblies throughout the country. If they decide that abortion is not something that Americans as a whole should be deciding, then whoever else underneath, like the individual states, would have abortion on the agenda, and you would decide it at a state level or a local level. But many of the critical issues, just I think from common sense or from experience, our experience as citizens, we can see would be national issues. Why should some people in Mississippi either be able to have or not have abortion, and other people in New York be able to have or not have abortion? I mean, this question of abortion is, I think, clearly something that Americans as a whole should decide. There would be, in other words, there would be a lot of issues that would be decided at the national level. But to answer your question specifically, it would be the National Council who would decide ultimately whether things would be decided at the highest level. Well, what was the second part of your
do you think
the size?
To get things more under control, that the United States should be smaller
Okay,
in the system?
no. I don't think that's necessary at all. this model of democracy that I'm proposing can be scaled up or down endlessly for any size society. I think ultimately, as a matter of fact, we're going to have this system at a world level.
Okay, Ayala, did you have a question?
Okay.
If your system is based on majority rather than on expert in issues such as climate, how would you handle the majority making bad decisions?
Okay. I like your questions oftentimes because it makes me give out my radical answers. I don't think there is such a thing as a bad decision. Okay? Yeah.
Oh boy.
Literally, okay. Philosophically, I'm a subjectivist, which means that I think that people have decisions. Individuals have decisions, large numbers of people have decisions, and that's it. There's no way to get to the bottom line and say, okay, you're right or you're wrong. Because I don't think there's another what do you call it, sphere of reality where we can go find out, like Plato. Plato has this, other, like heaven, where we can go and, ask, okay, what is the right or the wrong thing? People have just decisions. But to get to answer your question a little bit more reasonably, majorities in the community assemblies would have experts telling them about all kinds of things. Okay, they would have scientists telling them about climate change. They would have the one or two scientists in the entire world who are opposed to climate change. If they could make it to every assembly, okay, they could make their presentation, right? But they would be swamped by others who would have a more sensible opinion. So the people would listen to experts, but they would make the ultimate choice. So it wouldn't be a majority, the majority of the people versus experts. As a matter of fact, I think that in a real democracy, we would make a lot more use of experts. Right now, experts don't mean, what scientists say doesn't mean shit. Because what rules is the profits of the fucking corporations.
All right, now I see a bunch of hands up. We're almost out of time.
It's 8 o'clock.
I want to ask one more question that I have.
Yes, sir.
You mentioned earlier that you said that rulers don't really have a problem with protesters. So, and I'll grant you sometimes, like George W. Bush didn't have a problem with anti-Iraq war protesters. But there are plenty of other examples of rulers that didn't have a problem with protesters.
Oh, I thought I just got a sign for that. Okay.
Then why do the cops so often beat them up and kill them? Like, for example, just for example, at Tiananmen Square, just as one example.
The Chinese political system is a dictatorship. What I was referring to was our representative system. In our representative system, we have plenty of protests. We have protests literally every day somewhere.
I'm not just talking about dictatorships like communist China. I'm also talking about, like even here in the United States, there have been times, the first wave of Occupy Wall Street protesters was brutally beaten up by the NYPD. And there have been plenty of other cases. I'm sure some of you Chicagoans may be old enough to remember the Democratic Convention of 1968. So then how do you explain this these police actions if the ruling class doesn't have a problem with protesters?
I qualified my statement. Okay, I said within limits. I said to a certain degree. There are systems like in, let's say, communist Russia, especially a few decades ago, where you wouldn't have had any protests whatsoever. In our system, we have protests all the time, on all kinds of things. So, broadly speaking, our rulers don't clamp down on protests completely. It is getting harder and harder to have run-of-the-mill protests because we're becoming even more concentrated oligarchy. But historically speaking, protests have been tolerated by our rulers. That was the only point that I was making.
All right, and just one. You made a point earlier also, and this is in connection as a follow-up, that protests are ineffectual, you said. And so I would like to ask you, what about protesters in Tahrir Square? Well, you're in Egypt, or you already brought that up. What about protesters in East Berlin in 1989? And what about that?
Okay.
And And how about the protesters in Ukraine just within the last few months in Kiev?
Okay. First of all,
Or in Manila in 1986.
my bringing up of the topic of protesting was entirely within the constraints of our political system. I have, except for my example of Egypt, but generally speaking, I was talking about protest in our system. And for instance, with my experience with Occupy, okay, we had countless protests on all kinds of things.
Sure.
Nothing changed.
Okay.
And that's basically my point.
Okay. That the protests aren't going to change the U.S. system.
Yeah. That's basically my point.
Okay. All right. Now, we're kind of running out of time, folks. I'll let one more. I'll allow one more question. There's an awful lot of people who had their hands up. So
No, I just want to speak.
Okay. In the interests of fairness, I'm going to have to stop the questions, and we'll have to move on to the rebuttal period.
All right,
let's have a round of All right, folks. Now, my next question for y'all is, how many people would like to give a rebuttal speech? Everybody who wants to give a rebuttal speech, raise your hand. Okay, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. Did you just raise your hand a moment ago, Brom?
He just raised it.
Okay, I'll make it, that's 13. Okay, lucky 13. All right, 4 minutes each. So let the rebuttals begin.
Where do you sit?
All right.
Sit over there.
Oh, let me just add, if you're, let's make these the on-deck chairs. If you're waiting, just sit here, and I'm gonna bring another chair over, okay? So you can just have a seat here next to, next to this chair, okay?
Do we
Those
have
are the
a
on-deck
moderator?
chairs. Okay, go ahead, Gene.
Okay, I'd like to thank the speaker, very intelligent presentation. I went to class out of time.
Hey.
Something about changing the system. Changing the system. Because some people, when they talk like you're talking about, something you're talking about, they say, go call your senator. Go call your congressman. Why don't you go down, give me a break?
Thank you.
The answer is changing the system here. And I understood it clearly, because you're not the first one. Marx wasn't talking about, let's go get the king. He was talking about the system. Plato, before Karl Marx, Plato's Republic, he's talking about changing the system. Now, that's crazy news. I got to talk about this atheist, this anarchist. I'm an anarchist. Some people will take the official version of a definition, and that becomes what the subject is. Well, ask the person that is an anarchist. Well, an anarchist, I can tell you, is simple. I don't need no government. Fuck John Locke. Fuck Thomas Hobbes. I don't need that because I can do my own thinking. I don't need nobody to control me. I know what's right. I know what's wrong. And I'm a living witness of that. Now, some people will say the same thing when I say something similar when I say I'm an atheist. Well, do you go to church? Blah, 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 blah. In other words, the official version, if you are atheist, you are molesting little boys in church. Well, that was crazy. He ain't no atheist. You'll go out and you'll steal. You'll go out and you do something, this and that. Well, people, I got an honorable discharge from the Army. I got an honorable pension coming for my retirement. I get along with my neighbors, but I don't have to believe bullshit to satisfy the weak. So I'm with you. What you said is something that people should all think about at the same time. And that is, we, the people, outnumber the few by hundreds of millions. Well, hundreds of thousands etc. and so forth. And how we lost our country can be taken back the same way. They taken our country without violence, like everybody think when you say revolution, you talk about violence. Well, they committed a revolution, there wasn't no violence. Take our country back without a violence. Now, he mentioned voting, and I agree with that. And I don't know you, you don't know me, so I couldn't steal it from you, you couldn't steal it from me. I threw my registration card away 8 years ago because I got tired of the joke.
And your time is up.
Thank you.
I didn't think it was.
Okay, I'm going to do something a little unusual here. I asked the question of the speaker. He implied in his statement that we should call Barack Obama and Rahm Emanuel and ask them to resign. I asked him if he had done that. I implied he hadn't. He said that's a rhetorical question. I'm going to take 10 seconds of silence to ask everybody to think about that. In addition, of course, I should say that answer might have been acceptable to some or most of you. It wasn't acceptable to me. The only other two things I'm going to say is I noticed in the Tribune a statement about global democracy. It was, I think, in the last couple of days. I looked up the website, Global Democracy Ranking, of all the countries that they ranked. They didn't rank all the countries, but the United States ranked 17th. I think Norway was number 1. I forget, I don't know about who was number 80 or 90. Another thing is talking about does protest work. There was a book, a force more powerful by Ackerman and Duval. And that talked about protests, including in the United States, and sometimes nonviolent protest does work. Thank you.
In common sense, Thomas Paine wrote that nothing confirms obstinacy in kings than repeated petitioning. And I think basically that's a problem with them trying to do everything through a political system. It confirms obstinacy in political systems, of which we have plenty. And I don't really see this rather amorphous Rube Goldberg system as being any improvement. It's almost like jumping out of the frying pan into the fire. I don't think it'll take too long to degenerate to a sort of dictatorship. I've been in the opinion for some years that the only real power that people have is to take their business elsewhere. The problem is that this pseudo-free market, which is largely
Appreciate it. I will be back with your change.
largely funded upon a central bank and an income tax, paper money and an income tax. Destroys a lot of elsewheres. Can't make it under that kind of system. And entrenches these corporate oligarchies. It's a subtle welfare system. And I think the Koch brothers are just about poster boys for this sort of thing. You might call them welfare kings. And the thing is that they funded republication of 3 books by F.A. Hayek about 40 years ago. They were very influential in developing my thinking about how the market system works. That is a genuine free market and not this imposter founded upon a central bank and an income tax. But there's a lot I can say about this. What I've been doing probably the past few months, and probably will be for till the end of the year anyway, is I put together an email, so an open letter to Charles Cook, explaining the difference between a genuine free market and a free, in quotes, market. And I'm still collecting email addresses. Anybody who wants to give me one, I'll try and get. I've been having a lot of problems with the computers.
Thank you, Charlie.
I've had do a lot of work over, and I'm still having problems with them. And I've had problems getting computer access lately too. But I'll try and get one to you as soon as possible. I suppose I have to warn. I've gotten a couple responses already. The first responses I've got, I think, based upon some cognitive difficulties.
Your time is up.
Okay. Yeah, it's the problem with the camera.
Okay. There's free computer access at your public library. Okay.
Okay. You're on, Mr. Anderson. We're all set, Andy.
Okay, I'd like to thank our speaker for a thought-provoking evening. He's absolutely right. I agree with him 100%. We need a change. We need huge change, and we need it now. But talking about what might happen 8 or 10 years in the future on the political scene is not addressing the issues that we have to address right now. 2 weeks from tonight, as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about a subject, a summary of the top 10 blacked out subjects in America. This book, 10 Billion, describes what Censored News, Project Censored, calls the #1 blacked out story in our time, which is how fast climate change, global warming, climate change, whatever you call it, how fast it's happening, how fast the ice is melting, and how little time we have to avoid passing the tipping point. The tipping point is where the Arctic warms up enough that the methane starts to bubble up through the ice, and then the planet warms up 10 degrees. The scientific community currently is divided. The ones that study this, they're divided between the group that says we passed it, it's a self-fulfilling, reinforcing cycle, and there's nothing that can be done. The planet's going to warm up 10 or 12 degrees before 2040, and the kids that are here now aren't going to live to be 50 years old. There's that group. And then the other group says we have a chance. We have a small chance if we get a Manhattan Project or a moonshot project type going where we put up solar panels, windmills, go green, and get off fossil fuel all over the world. That's what has to be done, and it has to be done now. These 2 books, as I said, Crucifying America and 10 Billion, these 2 are summaries of the last 500 or so books my brother and I have digested on what's happening in America, what's happening around the world. I made a couple of notes, just quick it was good advice when men traveled on horseback. They said, don't shoot until you see the whites of their eyes. Well, in the horse and buggy stage, that's good advice. But when you're dealing with cruise missiles coming in at 400, 500, 600 miles an hour, you have to develop some sort of strategy to detect problems before the missiles get launched. And the same thing is true with a problem like global warming or some of these other things. When it gets big enough and close enough where you can see the evidence is overwhelming, it's way too late to do anything about it. So, any of you that want, we're going to give out literature, lists of hopeful things that can be done, hopeful websites, what's going on around the world. That'll happen 2 weeks from tonight. We're going to be talking about the top 10 blacked out subjects. We'll have 4 different pieces of literature to give people that night. One piece of literature is a reprint of the top 10 blacked out from 1997. A lot of people refer to that flyer as an instant food fight. Just carry it folded up in your pocket or purse when you get to a cocktail party or anywhere else. Just whip out that flyer, and if you can't get into an instant food fight like Animal House over one of those 10 blacked out subjects, then you're in a brain dead area and you gotta move on. That's what I said. Go green now or face extinction. Stop population growth or face an extinction event. Face reality now or face an extinction event by 2030, 35. We're talking 15, 20 years here. We're not talking 100 years away. So anybody that wants updates on this, come 2 weeks from tonight. Thank you.
He's talking about capitalism, and if you look at the very essence of capitalism, what it really is, the basics of it is exploitation of labor. And you cannot have a rational system based on exploitation of labor. What you get is the 1% and the 99%, and that's the outcome of it. What I want to talk about, not so much that, but what's happening in Ukraine right now. Right now, the government in Kiev is bombing about 8 cities along the Russian frontier. And it's bombing the civilian population. And it's creating havoc in these cities. And it's committing genocide against the people of these different cities in the Ukraine. Now, what's happening in Russia itself, the people are complaining about Yeltsin not putting up a fight, not sending troops into Ukraine.
Putin.
I said, oh, I'm sorry, Yeltsin, I said. Putin, not sending troops into Ukraine. And they're pressuring them to do that. And at the same time, in Russia, you have these missiles that could reach any city in Europe or any city in the United States. And there's fascists coming into Ukraine from France and Greece. And we're facing a situation that more or less happened during the Second World War. But this time it's the opposite. It's the United States with its NATO allies trying to take over the Ukraine and trying to get into Russia. It's a very dangerous situation, and it might cause World War III. That's what you got to look out for. Now, in the nation that's coming out, they have Stephen Cohn, who's a Russian professor at the City College of New York and at Princeton University, and he's come out with an article in the latest Nation, I didn't get it yet, that goes into this. urging everybody here to get a hold of that copy to see what's really happening and the danger of World War III.
Putin don't want war, okay?
Hey, one fool at a time. Ilana.
Good evening, I'm David Travis. When our founding fathers established our new system, they talked among themselves wondering how long the new system would last. And they generally agreed that it would be good for probably about 100 years. And about 100 years after that, we had a big fat pig who went around saying bully all the time, that he did the trust busting. And that was really the first intrusion into the private sector by government. After that came Woodrow Wilson with his very intrusive establishment of an income tax and a Federal Reserve. After that came FDR, where we had many intrusions into the private sector by government. And after that, we had Lyndon Johnson, who made many intrusions into the private sector, and where welfare state became a reality. The thing is that we have a gentleman here tonight, our speaker, who has, in view of all of these intrusions into the private sector, tells us that we should become a democracy. He offers an alternative to our situation. But the truth of the matter is, the best antidote to the situation that we're in is to return to the fundamentals that our founding fathers established. They gave us a republic, and under a republic, it was the best for everyone. Now it's the worst for everyone. We don't need to go socialist or go communist or go anarchist. We simply need a return to American fundamentals.
Yeah.
That's all.
Right. American fundamentals.
The best damn thing in the world,
Get
Charlie.
rich and screw everybody else.
I'd rather take American fundamentals than go to Moscow any day.
Let Paul speak.
In my opinion, I may be right or wrong. In my opinion, what our speaker has offered to us tonight in the long run won't be any different than what we have now.
Right.
Right now we elect officials, city, county, state, federal, who don't seem to really care or listen to what we want them to do.
Exactly. That's right.
What our speaker proposed is, well, I live in Algonquin, so a bunch of people chosen at random would form an assembly in Algonquin. And for that assembly, they would send their suggestions to the McHenry County Assembly, which is a different group of random people chosen from the whole county. And the McHenry County Assembly would send their suggestions to the State of Illinois Assembly, which is another group of random people chosen from within the state. And the State of Illinois Assembly would send their suggestions to the Federal Assembly, which is another random group of people chosen from throughout the country. And I want to stress the word suggestions, because nothing there says they have to follow the suggestions. So instead of having elected people who ignore us, we'll just have randomly chosen people who ignore us. And the advantage actually of our elected system is, if we really get cheesed off at somebody, we can not elect them the next time. We could have a recall or impeach them. In the system our speaker's proposing, since they're all randomly chosen representatives, I don't see a way of removing any of them. Thank you.
I'm Michael Foley. I'm very glad I was here tonight to hear Mr. Aranda's lecture. I liked it. I think he had a lot of good things to say. It was thoughtful. And when he started listing some of the ills in this country, I agreed with almost every one of them. Anyway, I would suggest to people, instead of not voting, I have said many times people should vote for someone else. And even though Mr. Aranda says that other people on the ballot really don't have a chance of getting elected, that's not really correct, because if enough people vote for the alternative candidates, they will get elected. I think the people in this country, when they go to vote this November, they should just flat out have an attitude of no more Democrats and no more Republicans. And don't vote for them. Vote for anybody else. Libertarian, Green Party, whatever. Vote for a commie. How bad can a commie be?
Vote for commies.
If the commies take power in government, are they going to get rid of all our rights? No, they're not. That's already been done. We don't have any rights. If the commies take power in this country, are they going to destroy our economy? No, they're not. That's already been done.
We're nice.
We're living on borrowed money and printed money. Now, one thing that Mr. Aranda said, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but anyway, it sounded like he was in favor of participation in government by vast numbers of people in this country. And I think that's a good idea. I really do. I really think that the vast majority of people in this country should somehow be actively participating in government affairs, at least on a weekly basis. But that's not going to happen in this country. The vast majority of people in this country want to be oppressed. I'm not saying they're in favor of oppression or they think it's a good idea. I'm saying the vast majority of people want to be oppressed. Proof of that will come in November, when the vast majority of people in this country who vote re-elect the people who are screwing us right now. People are getting it up the hump in this country on a daily basis, and in November, the vast majority of people are going to go to polling places and vote for the Republicans and the Democrats that are screwing us, the same exact people. They're going to say, you guys go back to Washington or to the state capitals or your local offices, and the exact people that are screwing us, you keep on screwing us. That's what the people of this country are going to say this November. I got something else. This idea of population control came up. I'll say it quick. I've had an idea for population control for many, many years, and I've been telling people think I'm crazy. Everybody in the world over 30 has to participate in a lottery once a year. People under 30 are exempt because they haven't had a chance yet to screw up the world. But if you're over 30, you've been screwing up the world, or you've been keeping your mouth shut about it, so everybody over 30 has to participate in the lottery. Everybody gets to choose a number from 0 to 9, all 10 numbers. And on one day, there'll be somebody pick the number out of the bin. Everybody who picked that number has to commit suicide. And this lottery goes on every single year until approximately 3/4 of the people who are living now are dead. Population of this world, if it gets back down to 2 or 3 billion, it'll only be the same as it was. It'll only be the same as it was about 100 years ago. Okay, that's it.
Okay.
I find it truly amazing that this audience here is of a bunch of senior citizens. Many of you are living longer than your past generations. Many of you have health care. Many of you have been living in this country in a real blessed system. We've never had it so good. I mean, you know, to be honest with you, this democracy actually works. We have elections. We have the principles of countervailing power. And yes, I believe the world is getting to be a much better, more peaceable place. Why? First of all, it's because of free trade. Second of all, it's because we've had a communications revolution. Third, it's finally seeing that the benefits of modern capitalism, economic growth, and the spread of laws are finally getting to the last vestiges in parts of the world. One of the biggest, most stable things you can do to get rid of excess population is to increase a country's prosperity. Under the last CIA speculation, if you get $7,500 per year per person, a child no longer becomes a source of labor, but becomes an expense. And when children become an expense, you love them, but you're not going to have as many of them. Let's face it, today in this country, a child today costs almost $1 million to raise. Maybe all of us can afford $1 or $2 million to raise some kids, but not 4 or 5 or 6. That's where your answer to population comes in. Now, what about how are we going to provide prosperity and stop global warming? It's simple. The equation's called E equals mc squared. Anytime you have a reaction, a chemical reaction, where you can take the same amount of material and have it 100 times greater, that's fundamentally is going to change the equation of the game. More prosperity to the people, more trade, more communications, and I'm telling you right now, we will see this world change for the better. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Yeah, I would like to see the world change for the good. And I would like to also, in my question earlier, to ask how we can change from current system to the system you propose. You say some kind of revolution. I was a little bit scared. I hope the revolution doesn't include war and the military and the killing. I think the world becomes peaceful and everybody has a good communication technology and capable of communication. So what we want to do is the current system I don't see is not fundamentally wrong. It's the Constitution is there and it's allowed to change. It's not fixed. And if you can persuade more than, say, half of the people go your way, go to different system, I'm sure the Constitution can be changed. Maybe a little bit slower, maybe not Andy's hope to change everything overnight. But I prefer that kind of system. So as long as it's a peaceful, people has a chance to discussion, to debate, to communicate, and I hope some good system can be brought up from everybody and then being applied in the society. Thank you.
In spite of Bill 1's opinion, the central banking and the income tax are perfectly natural outgrowths of the capitalist system, and capitalism has done fairly well with them. It's not going to go away immediately, and I'm not really proposing to put it to death. Well, I would like a socialist revolution, which would change the nature of society. I'm much more concerned for the workplace to be more democratic than the government apparatus, but the one is not unrelated to the other. It's not going to change without, the one is not going to change without the other changing. Where a revolution begins is where people feel the pinch and know that they can rely on others to make the kind of changes that will liberate them from their oppressions and from their poverty or from wars and destruction and oppressions. So that's does capitalism bring wars and oppressions? Well, it's based on oppression. The owning capitalist class says you can't work unless I hires you.
That's right.
And I'm not going to hire you until I'm pretty sure that I'm going to make a profit out of you.
Right.
And if I make as big a profit as I can, well, that's just the way things are.
Right.
And that profit, however, has a tendency in a capitalist system to diminish overall over the years, because capitalism concentrates the capital, and people, there's one law for capitalism, and that is to accumulate. You've got to accumulate more and more and get bigger and bigger, or you get sucked under. And you might even be squeezed into that proletarian working class that is super exploited and worked longer hours and gets fewer privileges like talking in the workplace or going to the bathroom on time, whatever. It's not nice to be an exploiter. But even nice people are made sort of nasty by the capitalist system and its squeezing of profits out of other people. Well, all right. So what do you do about making a democratic society? Well, I think the discussion of anarchists and who are these people, situationists, or whether
Okay.
It's a little abstruse, utopian, and I just hope that we get something a little more
Hey, Ted,
historic.
hey, time's up, Ram. Okay.
One way to reduce the population in this country is to choose a social system in which contraception for women will be paid by Medicare and the insurance companies. Right now we have a problem with that. Another problem around the world with population is the clause of the Catholic Church.
That's the speakers. You want some more soup? Like another bowl?
That's just as far as prosperity will solve all the problems. But I don't know which prosperity in this country you are talking about, Tim. Your optometrist must make, special pink glasses to look through. We have a huge gap of, the prosperity is the 1 or 2%. And even if we look at the 1 or 2% to see that they bring peace and goodness to the world, this doesn't happen. What we see is that there is greed and power hunger, and it's unsatiated. So most of us, other than maybe 4 people here, agree with you that we need to revolutionize, we need a major change, and we are very unhappy with the system. The question is how and what are we facing, what kind of barriers? One of them, mentioned by a lot of people in different ways, Bill went and Mr. Foley too, is the authoritarianism, the fear of somebody taking the power and the people not being organized enough to do anything about it. The abuse of power, the oppression, not just of a minority, but making oppressive decisions by the majority. And this was done, this did happen, and does happen all over the world. In this country, we had, when the first pioneers came, we didn't have a government. We didn't have a government system. We had more like something that you described maybe. You know, local authority presentations. And look what happened. I mean, we managed to exterminate almost the Native American population here and then did horrible things to each other. So I'm a new immigrant for, you know, I was not there at that time, not my ancestors, but I've read the history books. So checks and balances are most important to install in any system. And without that, I don't think that this system that you are, or those ideas that you offer will bring the improvement that you are after.
Are we all set?
All right, I haven't got a lot to say, but let's thank our speaker again. Presentation here. I'll be eclectic as usual. His basic premise is don't vote. And where's Carl? From Indiana. If I was from Indiana, I would not vote. That's where your policy has some application. I just read about Indiana again the other week, so it's turning into an intriguing place. All right, jumping around here, I'm going to help you out, young man, in terms of what socialism is. Every activity, endeavor in the world has a fundamental unit, and in society, the fundamental unit is the relationship, the exchange between individuals. And on what basis do you make those exchanges? The sum total of them is what constitutes an individual. It defines their life. Now, do you want competitive ones or do you want cooperative ones? And you can structure society such that you eliminate those situations that are competitive. It's not terribly difficult to figure out. And I don't accept systems based on competitive winners and losers, profit and loss. That simply doesn't work. And that's socialism here. Now, let's see, I'll jump to the next one then. But basically, let's say the shoe store. Let's get back to the shoe store. I like that one. There's a shoe store there. However, I look at it, and you do not see what I see. And you see, you saw a store there selling shoes, and I saw terrible arrangements that, in fact, I didn't have money, I didn't get any shoes, which I certainly need. No one cares if I went shoeless. My friend over here says, I said, well, what if I'm shoeless? He says, well, get rid of government. Is that going to get me shoes? That's what I mean, that's no answer, that's no response. Get rid of all government.
Yeah.
And will I have any shoes? Oh, don't interfere with the free market system.
Right.
Is that gonna get me any shoes? Are those rich guys, those guys who have the monopolies, are they gonna give me shoes? Don't kid yourself. They don't care.
Buy yourself a pair of shoes.
They don't care. So you got, that's what I mean, my notion there, that yes, far from getting rid of government, have the government to take over shoes, get rid of them all. You don't need the multiplicity of these. I need shoes. And just like, you have one simple source for securing shoes of a reasonable quality at a reasonable price. Is that so difficult to achieve? Is this some great enterprise that cannot be done? I don't know. Let's see. Now, let's see. I think that's basically it. The only other thing I gotta say is, you got some notion in here that Ted says, oh, it doesn't matter where you vote for candidate A, B, or C, and they're the same as X, Y, and Z.
Time.
Now, I assure you that Mitch McConnell and Ted Boner are not the same as Bernie Sanders and Dick Durbin. There is no conceivable way. The other thing is, localism in today's communication, telecommunications, is old-fashioned. We're getting bigger, not smaller. Where were you on these other guys? I didn't see that. Where's our moderator?
Charlie,
before, when it was on to him. Yeah, the guy said, where's the moderator? Now he shows up when I talk.
Charlie, if you want your shoes, I'll go $15 at Walmart.
Russia.
Yeah, that's right. No.
Charlie, I'll buy your shoes. $15 at Walmart on sale.
And real.
Yeah, but they won't last a week.
Me, paper.
You wanna support
So at work, I was having lunch with a guy. He tells me this story. He's working in this office. He's talking to the lady who's there. Time is slow, and it was like, this was in January, and it was a day that 3 different tractor trailers jackknifed on 3 different highways, and nobody could get anywhere, and that's why this woman was like late to work and missed her appointment, etc. So he was working with this lady, and he was having, it was slow, and he wanted to interject something, and he said, you know, I know why those, because she was explaining why she was late to work, and he said, I know why those truck drivers, why those accidents happened. So she goes, why? And the guy was telling me during lunch, he goes, well, it was because Illinois just passed the Gay Marriage Act.
That's it.
And God was upset with Illinois.
Right.
Right? So he caused these traffic accidents.
There you go.
And he's telling me this story, I thought it was funny. He told me this, and the woman just withdrew. And he was like, oh no. So then he changed it, he thought he'd change it from like a God thing to like a gay thing.
Yep.
Trying to get back into like society. So he says to her, well, that's not actually what happened. What happened was, with the passage of the Gay Marriage Act in Illinois, out of all the truck drivers on the road, you had 3 of them who were gay, who were talking on the phone, who were saying like, I don't know, we're going to get married, but what am I going to do? What am I going to wear? What are we going to flowers going to? And they were so busy on the phone, like who's going to be the guy? Who's going to be the girl? Who's going to, what are the flowers? They were so busy on the phone that they caused these traffic accidents. And that's how, this woman, again, this young woman withdrew even further. And so then, when he came and saw us during lunch, he was telling these stories. It was me, who's like an old person, and another old person, and we were like laughing really hard. We thought these were funny, And he said, I'm glad that you guys are laughing at this, because I thought I was insane. So I went with this story to a friend of mine, and I told him the same story, because it was kind of interesting. And he said to me, no, it's a generational thing. I go, what? He goes, yeah, it's a generational thing. He goes, I think that's funny, you think it's funny,
but if you tell my kids, they won't think it's funny.
Yeah.
He says they were taught, they learned in school that some of these jokes aren't funny jokes.
Right.
You know? I mean, we older people laugh at them, but they learned that, no, these jokes have costs. They're not funny. So I was like, wow, I went back to the friend, I told him, he goes, wow. And I kind of thought that, you know, the kids are all right. I think the kids are right on this one. Those jokes aren't funny. The jokes about Italians, Polish, you know, whatever the thing is, they're not funny. Cost too much. Okay? Now, about 50 years ago, if you were gay, you could be blackmailed. You know, some way or another, someone found out and it would cost you your job. And now we have gays in the military, gays get married. It's like 50 years ago, we had the African American Revolution, we had the women's rights revolution. You know, I remember a line from LBJ to Martin Luther King, which was in essence, if you want to get the civil rights law passed, you have to give me some protest. The idea that protest is ineffective is so silly.
Okay. All right.
Speaker gets the last word.
Well, yes, but now, we've still got more time. Is there anybody else who wishes to give a rebuttal speech? Okay. All right. Well, I'd just like to say a few words. First of all, I'd like to again thank Ted for coming here tonight and speaking. This was a really good presentation. I see a lot of people came out here, and it stimulated a lot of discussion, so that's good. All right. Now, I have to admit that I am not entirely neutral on all this because, for one thing, I have a bit of a bias. For one thing, I have actually helped Ted in Democracy for the USA, and I was moderator at a Democracy for the USA program, which actually has been on TV, and I believe you can access it on the internet if you'd like to see it. I agree with Ted on a lot of things. As a matter of fact, I would like to see the United States become a more democratic society. Now, that being said, there are a few points of disagreement. First of all, one of the things that Ed pointed out is that even if you have a system that's theoretically open to everyone, a lot of people simply will not have time to participate. They've got their own lives to lead. This is going to be especially true about working class people, what Rob calls the proletariat. So that in the end, you're going to have the same kind of people participating who participate in politics now. That's going to be elderly people who have got lots of time on their hands and are not yet in the nursing home. It's going to also be maybe young people who've dropped out of the system, and it would also be rich people who can kind of buy their own time. And so now the second, so you're going to one way or another, you're going to end up with a professional class of governors, of government people. Now the second point I would make is that you make a distinction between a corporation and a government. I believe this is a false distinction. I believe that when a corporation becomes big enough and powerful enough, it becomes a government. It has the ability to pass laws within its own corporation. It's not a democracy. It's a dictatorship ruled by the CEO. And it's and as a matter of fact, the gun control group Moms Demand Action seems to have figured out that corporations are the government of this country, and so rather than work through the ineffectual official government, they're going to be appealing directly to the corporations to restrict gun use. Okay, now the second, and I'd like to just on the same note, I'd like to just say that I'd like to talk about capitalism, a word that's been so overused that it almost is meaningless. I notice that people use the word capitalism to mean everything from Gus with his cell phone shoe repair shop to Chase, to J.P. Morgan Chase, and everything in between. And I notice that the people I hear who use this term make no distinction between the two. To them, a guy that owns his own mom and pop store is the same thing as Goldman Sachs, the same thing as Exxon.
Yeah.
Now, I think there is a difference.
Oh.
I think there is a difference, and I'm afraid this is going to. I think that for one thing, I think a person that just is by himself and owns his own business doesn't have the kind of political power that a multinational corporation has. And they have, now, the second thing I would like to bring up.
Do they have employees?
Well, many don't. Sometimes they're, sometimes it's by himself. But the point is that even if you have only one employee, there's it's much more of a relationship between equals. And I see that Tim here is saying that my time is up. So with that, I'm going to yield the floor to our speaker tonight, Ted Aranda.
Let's thank him one more time.
Thanks everybody for your thoughtful comments. I won't be able to respond to every one of them, of course, but a few points. Somebody called the system that I'm proposing a Rube Goldberg machine-like thing. It's actually not all that complicated. I have it laid out here in a handout. If anybody wants this handout right away, come see me. It's also explained on our website, democracyfortheusa.org, which is on the flyer that I passed out. So if you look at that, I think you'll be able to see that it's viable. It would be a huge change from now, but it's not inherently ridiculously complicated, I don't think. It might be a little bit complicated to explain, that's why I didn't go into it today. But if you look at it and study it a little bit, I think you can get it. That gentleman, you didn't have quite the right interpretation of the system about sending suggestions up the ladder. Ultimately, the community assemblies, the people in community assemblies decide everything. So the people do decide. You don't have another set of representatives deciding anything. And I think if people look at the system on the website, you'll get that. A couple people mentioned climate change and population growth also, things that have to be addressed right away. This is what I meant by there are critical issues that we simply have to address. And some of the solutions might be drastic. I hope you may have been serious about people committing suicide. I'm not sure we have to go that route, but the point, I think your point generally is a good one, which is that we have to take serious, very, very serious decisions to right this ship that we're on. But what I'm trying to get at with this system of democracy is that these things should be discussed by everybody, and ultimately we should all decide them. So you'll be able to propose this seemingly crazy idea, but if people get the impression that crazy situations might require crazy ideas, you might get some traction.
Thank you.
But I guarantee you're not going to get any traction now, because serious ideas are not taken seriously. Because our rulers don't even, it's not even a problem for them, really. That we have population growth, that we have climate change, they're making money. Okay? And they're doing quite fine. They're the elite, they're the 1% or the 0.01%. The Koch brothers, whoever's really running the show, they're doing quite fine, and they literally don't care about the problems that you and I and ordinary people care about. And that's exactly the problem. In our system, we vote in these oligarchs, and there are even higher oligarchs, like the Koch brothers and the Bill Gates and whoever, okay? And that set of people who run this society don't give a crap about the real problems that ordinary people face. You think our rulers care about Chicagoans gunning each other down? No, they don't really care. I'm sorry to say, and that's what has to change. And in order for that to change, we need an entirely different system. Let me see here. Somebody mentioned we should vote third party, and the exact quote was something like, if everybody voted for whoever, okay? You mean to tell me nobody's thought of that in our 200 years? The fact of the matter is that this is not going to happen. Even when a third party comes up and it becomes somewhat popular, it transforms into a major party. And then you have a couple major parties again. The fact of the matter is that people think, and they're not idiots when they go to the polls, they think that a realistic candidate or party to vote for is either a Democrat or Republican. Otherwise, you're wasting your vote. And that logic is not totally insane. There's some truth to that. So our system sets it up so that whoever you vote for, in effect, doesn't matter. Because not everybody's going to vote for. Does anybody know the name? I forget the name of this. The woman who ran in the last mayoral election. This third-party candidate, a black woman. I don't remember.
Girl
her
Mosley
name.
Braun?
What was her name?
Was it? No, never mind. No.
Does one person in here even know her name? Okay, this is my point. Okay, this candidate actually made a whole lot of sense on the issues. She was right on. Nobody voted for her. So you need to tell me we're all
Are you talking
Chicago?
about the Green Party? Jill Stein?
No. This Cynthia McKinney maybe? So I don't remember.
Cynthia McKinney ran for president
Okay,
in
no.
2008.
This Chicago mayoral candidate was very sensible. Nobody knew her. Nobody voted for her. She got like 0.01% of the voters, something ridiculous. Okay, but she was right on the issues. And my point is that the system is set up so that people like that do not get into power. Okay, generally speaking, there is a Bernie Sanders, and a couple other decent Democrats, or not. He's not a Democrat. He's an independent. There are a few decent politicians. But how is it that they're never in any large numbers? They're never the majority. Is this just happenstance? No. This is built into the system. We're screwed. We're screwed every darn election. Election after election after election after election. And so we have to change that whole business. A few people brought up the issue of, capitalism. We could sit here for the next, not hours, not days, but months, talking about capitalism and the nuances of capitalism. What does capitalism mean? What does capitalism not mean? How is it good? Is it bad? Okay. My point in bringing these things up is that these things are things that we should all discuss and decide on. Talking about it, what good does that do us? We could talk forevermore about capitalism, something as complicated as capitalism. Somebody said capitalism is the exploitation of labor. Oh, really? Some people feel exploited when they go to work. Some people are perfectly happy when they go to work.
It's not what they
It's not how you feel.
Oh, okay. So you're going to tell us what the reality is. Because it doesn't matter what I feel, or he feels, or she feels.
No, it don't matter.
That's how dictatorships
That's
start.
objective conditions.
There's
My
a thing
point.
called
One fool at a time.
it's called
My
objective
point.
truth,
Charlie,
not subjective.
Okay,
Charlie, one fool at a time.
you know what? Ultimately, we can't base government on quote unquote objective truth, because you have your objective truth, and somebody else has their objective truth.
That's
We
ridiculous.
have to decide
All the
things.
time, Sid.
The basis of democracy
That's
is
ridiculous.
everybody's opinion counts, and everybody has to be heard. And then we discuss things, and then we decide things democratically. We don't go to objective truth. We don't go to another planet, another sphere, to heaven or to hell to find objective truth, and then come back to Earth to decide, okay, here's the objective truth. Everybody in the mother has their objective truth. Okay, so we can't base government on that. We have to base government on people's opinions, people's thoughts, and discussion among intelligent people. And most of us are intelligent. Most Americans, most people on this planet are reasonably intelligent. Okay, so I have to wrap up. I can't get to everything, of course. Oh, one last thing. The other gentleman, I think he's gone, said, I don't need any control. He was defending anarchism. All right, nobody needs any control. So, I can go murder people. I can go exploit people. I can go, dump toxins into the river. I don't need any control. That is not the way to go. We do need control in society, and that's why anarchism is essentially, basically, flawed. And my time is just about up. So, thanks a lot to everybody. I really appreciate your attention and your comments. Thank you.
All right.
Objective truth is you have to eat.
Yeah, sure.
If you don't eat, you die.
That's true.
So everything has an objective truth. It's
Well,
ridiculous.
yeah, but
It doesn't depend on your opinion that you don't eat.
Yeah, but people.
It's ridiculous.